All right. Welcome, everybody. My name is Melissa, and today's practice is called forgiveness. And so, this is a practice that will help us kind of understand a little bit more of what forgiveness is and how we may use it, and how we can use it as a tool, being people with PMDD and having to forgive others as well as ourselves. And so, our plan for our discussion today is to start by just defining what forgiveness is and how we understand it for ourselves. And then, of course, we're also going to talk a little bit about what the Yoga Sutras say about forgiveness. And while the sutras do not directly use the word forgiveness, there are definitely things where the sutras kind of talk about the suffering that comes from holding on to anger. So we'll use some of the guidance from the Yoga Sutras. And then as we progress in our understanding of forgiveness, we'll do a meditation and visualization practice that helps us to cultivate some forgiveness for ourselves and for others, as well as really getting into the nitty gritty of naming what forgiveness feels like in our own body and how we can kind of understand the sensation of forgiveness. And then, of course, we'll complete our practice with a journaling exercise, putting together everything that we have taken from this lesson. All right, so before we get into others' definitions, maybe my definition of forgiveness, I would like to ask you to just take a moment to write down what your definition of forgiveness may be. So, what does it mean to you? How do you define it? Maybe how you think of forgiveness being defined socially. Of course, we may have legal systems that talk about justice and can confuse forgiveness and justice, and who forgiveness may even be for. So, this doesn't have to be like a super long definition. It doesn't have to be a ton of information, but just sort of getting out your ideas first before they're influenced by anything that I may say. So we'll just take about another minute. All right, let's go ahead and keep moving forward. And so, psychologists generally define forgiveness as a conscious, deliberate decision to release feelings of resentment or vengeance toward a person or group who has harmed you. And in this definition, we are going to include ourselves in that because we know that PMDD can be a very self harming illness. And so, this also takes into consideration that forgiveness does not actually require that they deserve it or the offending party deserves it or that we necessarily deserve forgiveness. Forgiveness is not necessarily about the transgressor, it is about us. And so this definition was taken from an amazing scientific journal. It's the Greater Good Scientific Journal, which is part of Berkeley. And so this is an active link, and I will be sure to include the PDF of this so that you can access this and check out this article for yourself, because it has some really great videos and other lessons. It's got a quiz in there. So it's got some really great stuff that you can dive in a little bit deeper if you want some more information specifically from this group. And so how does this definition kind of align with what you wrote down? Maybe you didn't necessarily think of it as totally conscious or totally deliberate. And so let's dive into that a little bit more to see some more things about forgiveness. And so some of the reasons why we may choose to forgive can vary. And so not all needs for forgiveness need to meet this criteria, but they may be something that comes up for us in terms of why we may want to practice forgiveness. And so starting with resolution, oftentimes we can't move forward on our own without figuring out how to forgive. When we are not forgiving, or when we're still kind of stuck in that state of feeling really angry or wanting vengeance or revenge or having a lot of animosity towards the transgressor, we feel the result of that stress internally. And so it may prevent us from moving forward because we haven't reached any sort of resolution internally. And so again, this doesn't necessarily have to do anything with the other person, with the person who hurt us or the people who hurt us. It's more about how we are feeling inside. And so that also goes into this next idea of releasing. And so when we're able to kind of resolve or release, we're taking more of our own control back to take care of our own mental health. So it's more about our relationship to us rather than the other person. You may have heard the old adage from the Buddha that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to become ill. And so that's sort of the same thing that forgiveness is. Forgiveness is that antidote to our own anger that we can help release, because it's a really valuable tool for our own self-care. And again, it has nothing to do with the offending party. And so the other aspect of forgiveness that may be really important to us is how it may sustain us. And so sometimes we need to forgive because it's healthier for our relationship or our workplace environment, our family. One of the things that we may do is hold on to grudges. We may be keeping score. We may have kind of a tally of who has done what, who has wronged who more. And that may do more injury than necessary, especially if they're small transgressions or if they're things that we don't necessarily need to hold on to. We're just holding on because of this pattern of feeling like we have to self-protect in that way. So forgiveness can also be a tool for helping us to have healthier, better relationships. Now, of course, this is going to depend on what we may need to forgive. So of course, there is a spectrum. There may be things that are not, we're not going to necessarily move past. We're not going to find resolution. We're not going to be able to sustain that relationship. So it's not necessarily always the case, because there may be times where our employer has done something and we are not going to sustain that relationship. We may be able to forgive, but the relationship has been harmed beyond repair, and we have to remove ourselves from that workplace. So all this to say, remember that forgiveness does not remove our power from us. It is a tool for our own healing. It is not necessarily about allowing someone else to trample over our boundaries, because our boundaries are extremely important. All right, so on that same note, a few things about what forgiveness is not. We've already touched on quite a few of these, but just to make sure that we're really driving them home. Forgiveness is not forgetting. We do not have to give ourselves amnesia in order to forgive someone, ourselves, or a situation. Forgiveness doesn't mean that we have to deny what happened either. People can still be held accountable, whether through our legal system, whether through a reporting system at work, or conversation with a loved one, we can have that accountability and not deny that the transgression occurred and also still have forgiveness. And so forgiveness is an element of a both and situation. It does not necessarily require that either or. We do not have to forget, we do not have to deny, and we certainly do not have to excuse. And so forgiveness is not saying, oh, that didn't happen or it wasn't as bad as it was. We're not going to gaslight ourselves in the act of forgiveness. A transgression is still a transgression. Our hurt is still valid. However, when we're trying to maybe move forward just for ourselves, not necessarily for the other individual or people or situation, we don't necessarily need to excuse that it happened, but we don't want to just hold on to that anger and continue to self-harm with it. And so taking that one step further, as I mentioned in our last slide, it is not necessary to always reconcile after a transgression has occurred. So we may have an issue with a partner and we may decide for our own well-being that we're going to forgive them, but that does not necessarily mean that the relationship has to continue. Oftentimes it is better to end the relationship so no more transgressions can occur where forgiveness would be necessary, especially depending on what the transgression may be. There are certain things that we may not be able to get over in order to sustain the relationship, and that is totally allowed. And so forgiveness is not forgetting, denying, excusing, or automatically reconciling. There are some things that are better left undone or left back in the past, but our forgiveness can still be a tool for our healing, not necessarily for their relief or their justification or vindication. All right, so some notes about what the Yoga Sutras say about forgiveness. And so in the Yoga Sutras, we talk a lot about suffering. We use the word dukkha, D-U-K-H-A, to describe suffering that usually arises from feeling disconnected, misperceiving, having untrue or unclear ideas about what a situation may be. And so in Yoga Sutra 131, we talk about some of the symptoms of dukkha that arise especially because of avidya, distractions being avidya, or this idea that we have misperceived a situation. And so those distractions would include distress, despair, suffering, that dukkha, trembling, and abruptness in breath. And so, of course, we would know that when someone has harmed us, these are almost all the symptoms of feeling transgressed upon. When we have felt like maybe someone has hurt our trust, has insulted us in some way, has not honored our needs, our feelings, whatever the transgression may be, big or small, we will feel these symptoms of distress, despair, suffering. And we often feel them very bodily. We feel our breath move into our chest. It may become very short and shallow. We may feel our heart rate increase. And we can name this as suffering, that this is dukkha. And so this is a symptom of being transgressed against. And this is something that we want to look out for because we're going to have our body and mind telling us this information that something is wrong. And so again, in that idea of not wanting to gaslight ourselves, we don't need to ignore our feelings or invalidate how we feel. We can remember that our body information is telling us that something amiss has happened, something wrong has happened. And so that means we don't necessarily have to ignore it, but we can take some actions to take care of ourselves in light of that. And so Yoga Sutra 1.33 says, by cultivating attitudes of friendliness toward the happy, compassion for the unhappy, delight in the virtuous, and disregard toward the wicked, the mind stuff retains its undisturbed calmness. And so essentially what this is saying is that there are 4 different ways we can think about how we interact with others in the world. Those that are happy and kind of walking around with a sense of lightness, those are the type of people we want to be friends with. Those are the type of people that generally will not transgress against us, or if they do, we can find some common ground and hold each other accountable and generally work through that. Now, other people who may just be chronically unhappy, we all know some folks like that who just kind of walk around underneath their own rain cloud. We can just extend compassion towards them. Now, extending compassion does not necessarily mean we have to be their best friend. It doesn't mean that we have to try to fix anything for them. We just want to extend that compassion and know that they are on their own journey. They will figure it out, hopefully, for themselves. And we don't have to necessarily take any action other than kind of extending that compassion outward. Now, the next one is delight in the virtuous. And so these are, again, types of people that we want in our life. And so those are the folks that are going to do right because they know to do right by others is to do right by themselves. They understand and see that we are all a part of this great big wide world and that we want to be honoring our fellow person, honoring the earth, honoring animals, and that this is someone that we should celebrate. And this is also someone that we should attempt to be ourselves. And so the final one is the one that I kind of want to hone in for this particular presentation. So this disregard towards the wicked. And so to me, this is a great example of forgiveness. And so we don't necessarily want to be their best friend anymore. We don't necessarily want to work with them. We don't want to have them as kind of a key player in our life. However, we're not just totally like letting them go entirely. We just remove their power over our mind stuff, over our life, our lifestyle, and that we just kind of say, they can be over here and I can be over here. And so that disregard can be almost kind of thought of as a synonym for that idea of forgiveness, that we let go of any anger, animosity, or need for vengeance, because we may know that holding on to that type of anger, having animosity towards someone, it takes up a lot of brain space in our own mind. And when we do that, our mind does not stay calm. So having that layer or barrier of disregard towards people who do not serve us and do not have our best intentions in mind can be kind of synonymous with forgiveness, cultivating forgiveness within ourselves as a form of protection for our own mental health, to retain the undisturbed calmness of our own mind, heart, and body. And so our final example, which I could have pulled more examples, there's a lot of really great Yoga Sutras, but the final one I want to focus on for this lesson is Yoga Sutra 2.33. And that says, in the distress that stems from doubt, cultivate an alternative mental attitude. So similar to 1.33, we can think of that disregard towards the wicked as kind of having that alternative attitude. So if someone has harmed us, someone has transgressed against us, instead of holding them sort of in the forefront of our mind with anger or animosity, we can cultivate that opposite attitude of just saying, I disregard that person. Like, they don't have to be a factor in how I feel. They don't have to be a kind of thing that comes up in my mind, hopefully at all, but definitely less frequently. That we want to cultivate an alternative attitude because this person doesn't deserve the time and attention that my anger may be giving to them. And so I'm sorry, I did skip Yoga Sutra 1.36. So this is one of my favorite sutras. And I think is really important, especially as people with PMDD. And it says, if you're grieving, be full of light. And so this is one where if someone has harmed us, we may feel drawn to the darkness. We may feel pulled into that negativity, that pessimism, that dukkha, that suffering and feeling of despair. And so if we're feeling ourselves pulled that way, we can try to cultivate that alternative mental attitude that Yoga Sutra 2.33 talks about and attempt to be full of light. Now, this Yoga Sutra is also sometimes thought to be quite literal. If we're grieving, be full of light, and can sometimes be thought of as the idea of candle gazing, which is a meditation practice where we essentially light a small candle. A tea candle works just fine. And you simply allow yourself to look at the light. And so your eyes may tear up a little bit, just totally fine. We can think of that as a detoxifying process, but literally allowing our light, or excuse me, the light of the candle to just kind of fill our senses and fill our mind and combat some of that internal grief we may be experiencing. And so I think all of these yoga sutras work together really well to help us have a understanding of what forgiveness can mean to our own mental well-being that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with that other wicked person or situation. All right, so on that note, let's go ahead and set up for our meditation and visualization practice today. And so I would recommend that to start our practice, that you just find a nice comfy seat. And so you can sit against a wall, you can sit in a chair, you can sit with a lot of pillows behind you, something that kind of allows your spine to stay fairly upright, but you don't feel like you're straining. Your abdominals shouldn't necessarily have to engage. You shouldn't feel like you're really working in order to find your position. It's also totally fine if you want to lie on your back, maybe with your knees bent. Your hands can rest on your belly, or one hand on your heart, one hand on your belly, or you can let your arms just rest in your lap, whatever feels most comfortable for you. Throughout our practice today, we won't have a particular type of breathing style. I will just recommend that you breathe slowly and smoothly, maybe allowing the length of your in-breath to match the length of your out-breath. Trying to find a balance between effort and ease. So we want appropriate effort. We don't want to feel like we're straining or struggling. We also don't want our mind to wander away. So we want to kind of stay with that idea of appropriate effort so that we're staying present in the practice and also not making ourselves uncomfortable in any way. And so then, of course, as we finish our meditation and visualization practice, we will journal on our experience. So no need to do anything. You can just simply listen and breathe as we go through the meditation and visualization. All right. So if you are feeling all set up, maybe take just the last few moments here if you want to get a sip of water or put some lip balm on or readjust your hair or your clothes. Go ahead and do so now. And then as you feel ready, start to settle in. Before you necessarily take conscious control over your breath, you can start by observing your natural breathing, noticing maybe if the breath is flowing in and out through your nose or your mouth, maybe if it's stronger through one nostril or another. As your awareness of your natural breath increases, slowly begin to invite in a little longer and smoother breath. Maybe taking this opportunity to seal your lips and breathe in and out through your nose if that feels comfortable. And as you feel your breath begin to slow and settle, draw your mind inward and allow your mind to also slow and settle. If it feels comfortable for you, allow your eyes to close, or your gaze can soften, your eyelids can become heavy. Now take the next few breaths to simply notice how your body feels in this moment. Noticing if there may be a sense of relaxation, or if there may be some areas of tightness or tension. Maybe describing certain feelings or sensations, noting the quality of those sensations. Perhaps the texture, the temperature, any colors you may note. Just establishing your baseline of how you feel in this present moment. Now, we've been talking a lot about forgiveness in today's lesson. And so take a moment to consider what forgiveness may feel like in your body. Observing where the sensation of forgiveness may show up. And observing what qualities, sensations, textures, temperatures, or colors you may experience as you cultivate a feeling of forgiveness in your body and mind. Maybe observing if it has any weight, if it is in certain places in your body or throughout your body. Observing if it has certain colors in certain areas of your body, or maybe one color. Take the next minute to observe how forgiveness feels within you. Now, take a moment to call to mind a person or a situation that you may be able to forgive, remembering that your forgiveness has nothing to do with the other person, and that this does not need to be a very large transgression. It may be something small that you are just ready to let go of. For the next few moments, picture in your mind's eye what it would feel like to forgive this other, how it may feel inside of you, what you may want to say, what may happen after, what changes may occur from cultivating forgiveness towards this other, how you would know you have done so. Take a moment to complete whatever may be necessary for forgiving this other or observing how it makes you feel internally. Now we'll move on to our final level of forgiveness, which is for ourselves. So, of course, as people with PMDD, we may have said things or made decisions or done things that aren't truly in alignment with who we know ourselves to be. So, let's take the next few moments to cultivate compassion and forgiveness for ourselves. Maybe calling to mind something in particular or thinking in generalities, how it would feel to forgive ourselves. What would perhaps happen as a result of that forgiveness? What it would feel like, what we may want to say or do. Visualizing in your mind's eye what forgiveness for yourself would be. Take the next few moments to complete your visualization on self-forgiveness, noting anything of import that you may want to journal at the completion of our practice. As you feel ready, bring your awareness back to your present body. Once again, observing your breathing, noticing your heart rate, your temperature, allowing yourself to return to how you feel in this moment, releasing the visualization of forgiveness and occupying this present moment, this breath. As we complete our meditation and visualization practice, you may want to take this time to find an affirmation that you can use for the rest of your day or maybe stay with throughout the week as you may continue to contemplate forgiveness. This affirmation should be personal and positive to you. It may be an I am statement. It may be a singular word. Allowing this affirmation to arise organically from within you. Take a moment to repeat it in your mind, visualizing the words in your mind's eye and breathing into it. Now, as you feel ready, you can slowly allow your breath to deepen, maybe giving your fingers a little wiggle, maybe gently turning your head from side to side. And as you feel completely back in the present, you may allow your eyes to slowly open and adjust yourself if necessary to a new position and grab your journal. And so our journal questions are really similar to the visualization practice we just went through. So we took this time to go through these exercises in our mind's eye, where we're able to just fully focus on the sensation. But now let's put some of the things that we observed to paper so that we have some information moving forward about what forgiveness feels like for us. So starting with forgiveness in our body, where do we feel it? Does it have a color, texture, temperature, a weight? Use any detail that came up for you in your meditation and visualization practice to describe your experience. Remembering that there is no right answer to this, that it will be completely unique to each individual. Remember, your journal answers can be in list form. You can write out in paragraphs. You can draw or doodle, whatever you feel comfortable with in terms of getting this information onto paper. There is no right way to journal. And so, as I already mentioned, you will have a copy of this PDF, this PowerPoint PDF. So if you don't feel like you have enough time to get everything down right now, you can, of course, revisit this. And so whenever you feel ready, you may move on to our information about forgiving another. Now, it's likely we all have someone we can forgive, and there may be big things and there may be very small things. So whatever came up for you in your meditation and visualization, note what that may have felt like, how you would have gone about it, and what changes you may experience when you do, which that may have been bodily, may have been socially, anything that came into your mind during your meditation. Now, of course, if you're not ready to move on, no need to. But as you feel ready, we'll move to our final journaling question about forgiving ourselves. So, same thing as another. Is there something we can forgive ourselves for? I'm sure many things can come to mind, big and small. But whatever particularly came up during your meditation and visualization, take the time to journal what your experience was like, how you may have gone about it, and what may have changed for you in your mind's eye when you did. And for our final journal exercise, whatever your affirmation may have been, take a moment to write that down and maybe put it in a place where you can see it throughout the rest of your day or the rest of your week. So you can recall the importance of this affirmation as well as the importance of cultivating forgiveness, understanding that it is for you and you alone, and that it does not mean losing any of our power or invalidating our experience. Thank you so much for joining me for this lesson on forgiveness. If you have any questions or comments, please send me a message or leave a comment. I'd love to hear what this experience was like for you. Thank you.